You won't believe what happened on this flight. A black man simply walked into business class, and a flight attendant humiliated him in front of everyone. But seconds later, his wife revealed her identity, and the entire cabin's reaction flipped completely. What happened next will leave you speechless. Absolutely. Let's expand this scene into a more vivid, detailed, and YouTube-friendly story segment of around 500 words, keeping it highly engaging and immersive for viewers. You won't believe what happened on this flight. A black man, dressed sharply in a tailored business suit, stepped confidently into the business class cabin, carrying only a sleek leather briefcase. At first glance, he looked like any other successful professional heading off on a business trip, but the moment he entered, the atmosphere shifted. The flight attendant stationed at the front of the cabin, a woman in her late 20s, didn't greet him with the usual smile or polite nod. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly, and a barely concealed frown formed on her face. She tilted her head and asked, "Excuse me, sir, do you have a business class ticket?" Her tone was dripping with suspicion, almost as if she couldn't believe someone like him belonged there. The man, maintaining a calm composure despite the tension, replied evenly, "Yes, I do. Seat 4A." His voice was steady, but inside, he could feel a mix of frustration and disbelief. After all, he had flown countless times before, always following the rules, always courteous, but this time felt different. Instead of acknowledging his response, the attendant let out a quiet scoff and muttered something under her breath. The words were faint but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Heads turned instinctively. A few passengers glanced at him sympathetically, while others looked down at their phones, trying to avoid the awkward scene unfolding in front of them. His cheeks burned with embarrassment, and for a fleeting moment, he wished he could disappear. He adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, and took a slow breath, attempting to regain his confidence. But the whispers didn't stop. They floated through the cabin like a cold wind, soft chuckles, subtle glances, and murmurs that seemed to imply he didn't belong there. He tried to focus on his seat, but the feeling of being judged, unfairly and publicly, was suffocating. The flight attendant, sensing the attention of the passengers, seemed to relish in the moment. She tapped her clipboard dramatically and said something else under her breath, again loud enough to be overheard. His wife, seated beside him, gave him a reassuring squeeze on the arm, trying to calm him without drawing more attention. She whispered, "Ignore her, we'll handle this," but her eyes blazed with quiet determination. The man forced a polite smile at nearby passengers who caught the awkward moment, hoping to diffuse the tension. Some returned a sympathetic smile, others pretended not to notice, and a few seemed uncomfortable, clearly unsure of whether to intervene. Every step he took toward his seat felt heavier than the last, and each moment seemed to stretch longer than the one before. By the time he reached his seat, he felt every eye on him. Some were curious, others judgmental, and a few were quietly recording the exchange on their phones. He placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment, fastened his seatbelt, and tried to focus on the upcoming flight, but the sting of humiliation lingered. What was supposed to be a routine flight had turned into a public trial, and he was left wondering why such bias could exist in such a supposedly professional environment. White heavy checkmark word count. 500 words. White heavy checkmark expanded with rich description, emotions, body language, and passenger reactions. If you want, I can continue this story and write the next section where the flight attendant escalates the humiliation, keeping the tension high and making it perfect for YouTube storytelling. Do you want me to do that next? Things got worse. Just as the man tried to settle into his seat, the flight attendant returned, her expression sharper than before. This time, she carried a measuring tape and a clipboard, tapping them against her palm as she approached. Her eyes scanned his carry-on bag with a suspicious glare. "Sir," she began, her voice artificially polite but laced with mockery, "business class only allows carry-ons of a certain size. Did you measure yours?" Her words weren't intended to help, they were meant to shame. She lingered over the bag, tilting it this way and that, as if she were performing some grand inspection for the amusement of the cabin. Passengers glanced up from their seats, some whispering to one another, others pretending not to notice, but the tension was palpable. Every eye in business class seemed to weigh him silently, and the man could feel the weight pressing down on his shoulders. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. "Yes, it's within the allowed dimensions," he said calmly, trying to mask the irritation creeping into his voice. But the attendant wasn't satisfied. She arched an eyebrow, glancing around to make sure everyone was watching. "Really?" she said, her tone dripping with disbelief. "It looks quite full. Are you sure it fits?" The man's wife, sitting beside him, remained the picture of composure. She noticed every subtle detail, the way the attendant leaned in over his bag, the exaggerated way she adjusted her uniform, the faint, forced smiles directed at other passengers as if daring them to notice. Her mind raced. This was more than just rudeness, it was intentional humiliation. She leaned closer to her husband and whispered, "Ignore her. Let's see how this plays out." Her words were calm, but inside, she was already planning her next move. The attendant continued, moving from one small comment to the next, each designed to erode his confidence. She questioned the way he wore his jacket, gestured dismissively at his leather briefcase, and even scrutinized the way he fastened his seatbelt, as if his every action were worthy of public ridicule. Every gesture was theatrical, designed to draw attention and provoke discomfort. Passengers started to shift in their seats, some offering polite, awkward smiles to try and ease the tension. Others whispered quietly to each other, uncertain whether to intervene or stay silent. The air in the cabin felt thick with unease, the kind that comes when someone is being singled out unfairly in public. The man tried to maintain his composure, his posture straight, his expression neutral, but the humiliation was starting to take its toll. His wife noticed the smallest details, the way a few passengers had subtly moved their heads to avoid eye contact, the soft click of phone cameras as some recorded the ordeal, and the quiet murmur of disapproval spreading among the audience of travelers. The cabin had become a stage, and he was the unwilling protagonist in a drama of prejudice and condescension. Even as the man attempted to remain calm, he could feel the sting of every whispered remark, every judgmental glance. The flight attendant's relentless scrutiny seemed designed to make him question his own presence, to humiliate him in front of everyone, and to assert power in the most petty way imaginable. For a few tense moments, it seemed like the humiliation would continue unchecked, the cabin echoing with the unspoken tension of injustice. White heavy check mark word count, 500 words. White heavy check mark expands the scene with detailed emotions, body language, and passenger reactions. White heavy check mark builds tension perfectly for YouTube storytelling. If you want, I can write the next section where the wife reveals her identity and flips the situation, making it dramatic and viral ready for YouTube. Do you want me to do that next? Just when it seemed like the man would have to endure the rest of the flight under this relentless humiliation, his wife did something that would change everything. She stood up. Slowly, deliberately, every movement radiating calm authority. The cabin seemed to shift as if sensing something monumental was about to happen. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and fixed her gaze on the flight attendant, who was still smirking, convinced that she had the upper hand. "I think you should know who you're speaking to," she said, her voice firm but measured. There was no anger in it, only clarity and command. The words cut through the cabin like a knife. Immediately, the murmurs among passengers subsided, replaced by an almost tangible silence. Heads turned. Phones hovered mid-air. Every eye in the business class cabin now focused on her. For a moment, the attendant looked taken aback, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. The smirk that had fueled her condescending behavior vanished instantly. She opened her mouth, as if to respond, but no words came. The woman beside the man continued, unshaken. With a calm yet commanding tone, she revealed her identity. She was a top executive at one of the largest airlines in the world. Her influence spanned continents, her decisions affected airline operations across multiple countries, and she held a position that could change careers, and even livelihoods, with a single directive. The flight attendant's eyes widened, and her posture stiffened. The power dynamic in the cabin had shifted entirely. What had started as a one-sided act of humiliation was now completely reversed. Passengers began whispering, some exchanging astonished glances, while a few discreetly recorded the encounter on their phones. The air was thick with awe and disbelief. This was no ordinary passenger confrontation. This was a masterclass in composure and authority, unfolding live at 35,000 feet. The woman didn't stop there. She continued, her voice calm but resolute, explaining that their family frequently traveled for business and charitable work, had invested in the airline, and was deeply committed to promoting diversity, equality, and fairness in all their ventures. Every word she spoke carried weight, every sentence reinforced her credibility. Passengers listened intently, some nodding in approval, others whispering in disbelief at the audacity and brilliance of the moment. She then locked eyes with the flight attendant, her gaze unwavering, piercing through the air of arrogance and entitlement. "So," she said slowly, emphasizing each word, "perhaps a bit of respect and professionalism is in order." The cabin remained silent, every passenger holding their breath as the message sank in. The attendant, now visibly flustered, fumbled for words and quickly retreated, unable to muster a response. Her authority, once assumed to dominate the situation, had crumbled in seconds. In that moment, the man sat silently beside his wife, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. The humiliation he had endured was replaced by vindication, but not through confrontation or anger, through calm, poised revelation. Every passenger in business class had witnessed it, the ultimate reversal of power, dignity asserting itself over arrogance, and a lesson in how composure and confidence could change everything in an instant. From that moment, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted completely. The tension that had gripped every passenger's chest moments before evaporated, replaced by a quiet sense of awe and respect. The flight attendant, who had moments ago held herself with condescending authority, now looked small and flustered. Her hands fumbled with the service cart, her eyes darting nervously to the floor, avoiding the gaze of anyone in the cabin. Without another word, she retreated to her duties, the smirk that had fueled her earlier behavior nowhere to be seen. Other crew members, witnessing the dramatic shift, exchanged awkward glances. They were caught off guard, realizing just how unprofessional and inappropriate their colleague had been. Some avoided eye contact, others whispered quietly among themselves, as if silently acknowledging that they should have intervened earlier. The cabin, once buzzing with discomfort and tension, now hummed with a sense of admiration and respect for the couple. Passengers who had been quietly observing the ordeal now focused on the man. Despite enduring relentless scrutiny, ridicule, and humiliation, he remained composed, sitting upright with a quiet dignity that radiated from every movement. His face held calm resolve. His eyes met those of fellow passengers not with anger, but with quiet confidence. In that moment, it became clear, dignity and poise speak louder than any harsh words or cruel behavior. A few passengers, emboldened by what they had witnessed, approached the couple quietly. One elderly woman whispered, "I'm so sorry that happened. You handled it beautifully." Another young man, sitting a few rows back, nodded toward them and said, "You stayed so calm, most people wouldn't have." Even the flight attendants who weren't involved in the incident seemed to soften in demeanor, some offering small, apologetic gestures. It was a collective acknowledgement. What the couple had endured was unjust, and the way they handled it was inspiring. Throughout the cabin, there was a quiet shift in energy. The whispers of judgment and suspicion that had floated around earlier were replaced by admiration and respect. People began quietly sharing their observations with one another, remarking on the man's composure and the wife's decisive courage. Even passengers who hadn't witnessed the full interaction now turned their attention toward the couple, sensing that something remarkable had occurred. It was more than just a moment of vindication, it was a lesson in power, poise, and dignity. The man and his wife had faced public humiliation, yet they responded with calm authority rather than anger. They demonstrated that standing up for oneself doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes, the quiet confidence and measured assertion of one's position are far more impactful. By the time the cabin had settled, it was clear that this incident would be remembered by everyone on that flight. The couple's ability to maintain grace under pressure, to assert their worth without aggression, had left an indelible impression. Passengers returned to their seats, not with discomfort, but with a renewed sense of what it meant to treat others, and oneself, with respect. In that cramped, high-pressure environment of business class, a powerful lesson had been quietly delivered. Courage, dignity, and composure can turn even the most humiliating situations into moments of triumph. By the time the plane touched down, the incident had already become the talk of the cabin. Phones were buzzing incessantly as passengers shared snippets of the confrontation, some recording short clips while others narrated the scene to friends and family over calls. Social media, always quick to pick up such stories, was beginning to light up with speculation and commentary. Hashtags about respect, dignity, and racial bias started trending, as people expressed shock and admiration for the way the couple had handled the situation. Within minutes, what had begun as a private humiliation on a single flight was transforming into a viral story with global reach. The man and his wife rose from their seats with quiet confidence, their posture unwavering. Every step down the aisle exuded composure and self-assurance, as if they were walking not only through the aircraft, but through a symbolic trial of public judgment, one they had already won. Passengers turned to watch, some nodding in silent approval, others whispering among themselves, saying things like, "That was incredible," or "I wish I had that kind of poise." Even those who had previously looked away in discomfort now seemed inspired, recognizing that the couple's restraint had turned humiliation into a lesson in dignity. Once they disembarked, airline officials, alerted by the passengers and flight crew, quickly approached to address the situation. The airline promised that disciplinary action would be taken against the flight attendant, making it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated. Internal investigations were already underway, and statements were being drafted to reassure the public that passenger treatment and professional conduct were taken seriously. The couple, however, remained calm throughout. They did not seek personal revenge or public attention. They simply wanted the incident to serve as a lesson in respect, fairness, and accountability. As the story spread across social media, it sparked wider conversations about discrimination and assumptions. People debated the small ways in which bias can manifest, from subtle gestures to outright humiliation, and the responsibility of individuals and organizations to confront it. Many praised the couple's response, emphasizing that the most powerful way to handle injustice isn't through anger or confrontation, but through calm authority, clear communication, and maintaining one's dignity under pressure. Their story became emblematic of strength, resilience, and grace, a modern example of how composure can transform a negative situation into a moment of empowerment. Even as they walked through the airport, blending back into the crowd, passengers continued to whisper about the events they had just witnessed. "Wow, what a way to handle that," one person murmured. Others nodded quietly, still processing the display of poise they had seen firsthand. For those who had watched, it was a reminder that sometimes courage and integrity are quieter than fury, yet infinitely more powerful. The man and his wife disappeared into the terminal, but the lesson lingered. In a world where assumptions and prejudice can hit unexpectedly, true strength lies in responding with dignity, revealing the truth calmly, and allowing your composure to speak louder than words ever could. That day, on a single flight, passengers had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a confrontation, but a masterclass in human respect, courage, and the quiet power of standing tall in the face of adversity. Wow, what an incredible story! If you were amazed by how they handled this situation, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss these jaw-dropping stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below.